somewhere. Yeah, it's got its big square around it.
It's like a rust vehicle if you don't be driving through a dust cloud.
Although, you know, but they can.
Good luck, man.
You too.
Can't think of a more appropriate way to start a season than to line up with 700 of your friends, wait for cannon fire, and then head off into the desert for 100 miles of the Kenda Desert 100. So with that, welcome to the 2017 season. Racing with me today is Tim from Saskatoon on his WR250F, and our pit crew slash mechanics of my brother-in-law Dan and our friend Devin. Didn't take long for things to kind of go off the rails a little bit. Wasn't 2 minutes into the race and I was already having my first issue. I came over the whole shot here and a lot of chaos going on, lots of riders there, and every time I pulled in my clutch my bike wanted to stall and I couldn't figure out what was going on, and just the thought going through my head was that I didn't even make it 2 minutes into this year and I was already out. But as you'll see here in a second, I ended up having to go through a sagebrush, and what happened is it just ripped off a big branch and it jammed itself in my brake, and the rear brake was dragging itself along the road. This is the 47th running of the Desert 100. This is my second. I came here last year and finished on my WR250R. Had a great time. This year I'm set up a little bit differently. I'm on a CRF250X in 09. It's been a great bike so far. I've put it through a couple of races and really have no complaints at all. It's set up well for me and really enjoying it so far. Last year when I tried this race, I came to the conclusion that both I and the bike needed to lose weight, so I came back about 15-18 pounds lighter, and the bike's 50 pounds lighter, and that's helped overall with the attempt. I wasn't quite so exhausted, quite so tired. I was able to make better choices and finish a little bit higher this year, but just so much less effort required on a bike that's really made for racing as opposed to a street bike that just happens to be able to finish it. As the name implies, this is a 100-mile race, or 160 kilometers, as I found out last year. The range of riders goes from kind of modest experience all the way up to pro riders that are factory sponsored, so there's quite a range and quite an ability different gap between the top and the bottom, although I'd wager to say that there's really no people that are inexperienced on this race. It's a long race no matter how good you are, and it's just relentless terrain, very tough in its own right, nothing that's extreme at any particular moment, but it's just relentless. You never get below about 80% effort, and you really gotta stay focused. So it's not for beginners, but it is achievable by average or better riders. It'd be a fun experience for anybody to come try if you get a chance. Part of what makes this race so difficult is the rocks that crop up out of the terrain. They just kind of come out of nowhere. Had some surprise experiences this year, and rocks that I didn't see, so I was going a little bit faster and hit them a little bit harder. But you can be flying along, and there aren't too many spots where you get great speed going, some fourth gear and occasional fifth gear and some wide open plains, but you really got to be careful, as you can see in the rocks. They just kind of crop up out of anywhere. They're hard to see just the depth of them, given that you're just shooting from a camera on the head. But they're jagged and they're buried really deep into the ground, and they can deflect you in a hurry. You'll see a whole lot of carnage through the race. There's a significant number of people stuck in the mud, but you also see a lot of people off to the side and bikes without riders. It really does take its toll. It's hard to explain exactly how hard on the body and on the bike this race is. It does create some funny thoughts in your head, though. You have a lot of time to kill, and there's some pretty weird thoughts that creep up as you get into your third, fourth, and fifth hour of the race. And you're just wondering what exactly it's going to bring next, because at first you're flying through rocks and you think, oh, that's bumpy, and then you get into some whoops and you think, oh, that's bumpy, and then you get into some mud, and that takes a lot of effort out of you, and you're thinking, what's next? And then they start throwing rocks in the mud, and then there's rocks in the whoops, and then there's whoops with mud in them, and then it never seems to end. It just keeps coming, which is part of what makes the race so fun. It's such a diverse terrain, and really rare to find that many different types of riding in the same area. So it's really a class race that way. It gives you more than you think you could ever get in one event. And with that, I do have to mention the danger of the sagebrush. They do mention it in pretty much all of the literature reading up to the event, but I swear that the sagebrush grow out of rocks. You get off trail in those things, and every time you think you can get through one of them, somebody buries a 10-inch rock in there, and you just can't see them. And if you don't get the 10-inch rock, you end up ripping up a branch off of there, and it's stuck in your bike somewhere. But they're lethal, and it's for a bush that's really not all that big and doesn't look all that sturdy. They can wreak absolute carnage on your bike. Without a shadow of a doubt, you want to armor up your bike with anything available that you can strap to it that might soften the blow a little bit and save you from puking out all your oil or getting a pinch flat along the way. The course was significantly different this year than last. There were some weather differences as well. Last year I think it was 25, 27 degrees Celsius, whereas this year was about 13, 14 degrees, so that was a little bit easier in that you weren't so dehydrated all of the time. One of the other differences was that last year was very dry, whereas this year they've been having a lot of rain and I believe flooding issues, and it made for some pretty wicked mud pits all over the place, and they even gave us a warning prior that we were allowed to go around them. As the race progressed, though, you just kind of get tired, and in my case I just started blasting right through the middle of them with a healthy dose of throttle, and that seemed to get us through all right. But as you'll see throughout the video, that there are people buried everywhere, and a lot of people didn't finish on the basis that they couldn't get their bike out in a reasonable amount of time. When we lined up for the riders meeting prior to the race is divided into two major groups, one being the 100-mile class and the other one being the 50-mile class, but they told us that there's approximately 1,500 riders this year, so that's a ton of people on a 50-mile course. The 100-mile class that I was in, and Tim was in as well, had about 700 riders lined up at the start, so that was about 100 more than last year. So it's good to see that it's growing as it's getting close to its 50th year. Quick story that I'll come back to here. Notice the head shake on the bike as I'm going straight. Next story in quick succession here is you'll notice off to the left there a fellow giving his bike some encouragement to get back into the race. I feel bad for him, I really do, but it is pretty funny. And now back to the head shake. This year, with the help of my brother-in-law, we machined some pretty trick risers for me so I can custom mount a Scott stabilizer on the bike. This is the first time using the Scott stabilizer. It's honestly, I'd ridden it a grand total of probably about an hour and a half prior to the race, and that was on Saturday, the day before. That head shake, I was cruising along probably about 60, 65 kilometers an hour there, so not super fast, but fast enough, and whatever I hit, and I still can't see it in the video, it deflected the front wheel probably about 20, 30 degrees over, but it hit so hard that the stabilizer, which is a hydraulic damper for your steering, I could actually hear the fluid going from one side to the other, and probably the next 5-10 minutes there, I kept thinking to myself that, well, that stabilizer seemed expensive at the get-go. That would have been an absolute terrible off into a whole pile of buried rocks into that grass, and that probably would have been the end of my race there, save for the stabilizer. I guess since we're talking about end of the race, I might as well cover an incident from the end of my first lap. My battery on the camera only lasts about 2 hours, and my laps were about 2.5 hours, 2 hours 40 minutes, so it missed this, but there was a little bit of a drop off, and instead of just giving her a little bit of gas to get the front end up, I panicked and hit the brake, and I went over the handlebars and over the edge of this about 2.5 foot drop off, and then the bike had stopped, and then it came over the top, and as I was laying on the ground, the bike came down handlebars first, and the handlebar landed on the top of my foot, which is now black and swollen pretty profusely. In the off season, I bought a set of Guarani SG12 boots, and they had replaced some Forma boots that are more adventure or enduro style boots with much thinner padding on them. And judging by what it did to the handlebars did to my foot through the boots, I can pretty much guarantee that would have been another end of the race, and probably 6 weeks in a cast if I hadn't have had the thicker boots on. So if you're riding in the desert, take as much money as you can find anywhere, beg, borrow, or steal, and buy a good set of boots. This little rocky section here, we did it last year, but it was in the other direction, and they had there's a professional photographer set up there to take pictures of us, and you could buy the pictures at a later date. But I remember as I got there last year, I was pretty tired, even on the first lap, and in the course of probably that 150, 200 meters long of rock there, I went down 3 or 4 times, and did pretty much the same thing on the second lap. It doesn't look all that bad, but those rocks were slippery, not so much in being wet, but they just rolled from underneath your tires, and it was so hard to get good footing. You really just got to blast through it with a healthy amount of throttle so that no one rock can end up pushing your front end out. Another difference this year was the river crossings. Last year we got to do a partial river crossing and then onto a bridge, whereas this year the water seemed pretty high and pretty rowdy at places. So we crossed over a few times, but it was always on a bridge, which is kind of cool in its own right, although it tended to be an area that got backed up a little bit. Now we're getting to the latter stages of the race here. This is most likely around the 5.5 hour mark. You can start to see it in the way that your bike starts to wander around a little bit, and everybody's spaced out a little bit more, and everybody's sitting down for the most part. You're just trying to stay up on your feet so you can be more efficient and ride a little bit faster, but you're just beat up so bad that you're just trying to get to the finish in survival mode. But it's still a great place to pass if you can stay fresh through the end of the race there. Make sure you pace yourself well. I ended up picking off probably more people in the last hour and a half, 2 hours in the race than probably did the entire race last year. I mean, part of it was the bike, but it was just in much better shape this year, and being a little bit lighter helped a lot. And I was able to last till right to the end of this race, and felt pretty good at the end, other than a few bumps and bruises here and there. Within certain limits, I tend to get faster as the race goes. I'm not entirely sure why. I'm not in that great a shape overall, but I think I just think too much as the race gets started, and as I get too tired to really predict things, I just turn it off and just become maybe a little more reckless, but at the same time just don't double guess myself, and I think that ends up being a much faster way to ride for me. Although you do have to pace yourself and you do have to be careful. Sometimes the best course of action is just a little extra throttle.
You better catch that guy.
I better.
I've got to send a big shout out to that fellow there for the encouragement, and also to all the other stump jumpers that were there sheriffing the race and helping us out and doing the checkpoints. Pretty much everybody had something to say as you went by. They were all encouraging or had something funny or clever to say. It's fun to interact with them and try to include one or two just to let them know that we care. But thanks a lot, and you guys put on a great event. And just in case he was looking, and for posterity, I did in fact catch that guy. Took me a few minutes, but I did eventually pass him. That little exit from the mud hole there is a good example of why you always hold on to your handlebars extra tight and keep your feet on the pegs. The bike can't exit from you if your feet are on the pegs. As we get to the end of the video here, I'd like to thank you for staying along. We both did finish. Our places are at the back there. I finished 252nd out of 700, and I think Tim was 304th. 43% didn't finish this year, and closer to 50% didn't finish 2 laps, which is a little higher percentages than last year, but still pretty indicative of how tough the event is. So I hope that you enjoyed the video, and hope that we'll see you there next year.
The black sign-up trailer. Ron Burns and Greg Burns.
Made it, Tim!